A poor girl scratched a millionaire's car. What he did next left everyone stunned. He was a millionaire tech mogul with the world at his feet. She was a humble florist just trying to make ends meet. Their worlds were never meant to collide until a scratch car on a rainy San Francisco afternoon sparked a connection neither of them saw coming. But as their bond deepened, whispers grew louder. Reputations were questioned, and love was put to the ultimate test. Can a man who's built his life on power and prestige risk it all for something as fragile and real as the heart of a woman who wants nothing from him but the truth? Stay until the end. This story just might change how you see love. Before we begin the story, leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our latest stories. Enjoy the story. Nathaniel Brooks was the kind of man whose name sparked interest in boardrooms and investment circles across the country. A self-made millionaire in his early 40s, he had built his tech empire from a single app developed in a college dorm into a conglomerate headquartered in the heart of San Francisco. His life was a polished rhythm of early morning strategy, meetings, power lunches at Nob Hill, and black tie galas where everyone knew his name. From the outside, Nathaniel had everything wealth influence and a meticulously curated life of luxury. Yet for all its glitter, something within him had begun to dull. It was a cool afternoon in early spring when the unexpected happened. Nathaniel had just stepped out of an upscale cafe in Union Square, a signature flat white in hand, scanning his phone, as usual, for updates from his legal team. The world around him buzzed with energy. Streetcars, rattled by tourists, snapped selfies with the iconic heart sculpture, and the scent of blooming cherry blossoms drifted in the air. Then he heard it, a screech, a sharp scraping sound that pulled him out of his thoughts like a bucket of cold water. His gaze shot toward the street, and there it was. A long, unmistakable scratch running across the passenger door of his sleek black Tesla Model S. The car, a symbol of elegance and status, now bore an ugly scar. Standing nearby, frozen and clearly mortified, was a woman in her late 30s holding a bicycle. Her cheeks were flushed, her breath shallow, and she clutched the handlebars like they were the only thing keeping her grounded. She wasn't dressed like anyone Nathaniel would normally cross paths, with a faded mustard cardigan over a floral blouse, worn jeans with streaks of paint on the thighs, and brown boots that had clearly weathered more than a few San Francisco hills. Her sandy blonde hair was swept up into a loose bun with strands escaping freely around her face. But it was her eyes that stopped Nathaniel. Green-gray and clear, filled with a mix of worry, strength, and something else. Defiance. I'm so sorry, she stammered, approaching slowly. I didn't mean to. I lost control. Turning the corner and didn't see your car until it was too late. Nathaniel's instinct should have been irritation, possibly even anger. The Tesla wasn't just a car. It was custom ordered with a rare matte finish and imported details. Repairs wouldn't come cheap. But as he looked at her, really looked at her, something strange happened. The heat rising in his chest didn't spill over into rage. Instead, it cooled into something much more unexpected: curiosity. "Are you okay?" he asked, his tone even measured. The woman blinked, clearly surprised. Yes, I guess. But your car, the car can be fixed," Nathaniel said, with a small shrug, slipping his phone into his coat pocket. "You, on the other hand, seem a bit rattled. She exhaled slowly, her body relaxing just a bit. Clara. My name's Clara Jensen. Nathaniel, he said, extending a hand, which she hesitated before shaking. You're not mad, she asked. Would getting mad change anything? Clara laughed softly, the tension easing from her shoulders. No, I suppose not. For a moment, they stood in silence, the city rushing by around them. Nathaniel wasn't used to silence. His life was one of constant motion, voices, numbers, negotiations. But this pause, this quiet moment with a stranger who hadn't recoiled from him or fawned over his name, it felt like something rare, something worth noticing. Do you live around here? He asked almost casually, though his interest was anything but. I work at a flower shop just down the block, Clara replied, pointing in the general direction of a quiet side street. I bike to work most days. Easier than dealing with parking. Nathaniel's eyes shifted to her old bicycle. Its paint chipped a tiny sunflower bell clinging to the handlebars. It was real, just like she was. I take it, floristry doesn't pay. Like tech does. She tilted her head, her smile small, but confident. I don't do it for the money. I love it. There's something beautiful about arranging chaos into something meaningful and watching someone's face light up when they get flowers that makes my day. It wasn't the answer he expected. And maybe that's exactly what made him want to know more. If you've enjoyed the beginning of Nathaniel and Clara's story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss the next chapters full of emotion growth and the kind of twists only real life can write. Stay tuned for part 2, where an unexpected coffee changes everything. Nathaniel wasn't quite sure why he said it. Perhaps it was the way Clara had handled the awkward moment earlier. Or maybe it was how she spoke about her work with purpose, not pretense. But the words slipped out almost instinctively. Let me buy you a cup of coffee. Clara raised an eyebrow to apologize for the scratch. He nodded. Think of it as a peace offering. She looked him over, half amused, half cautious. All right, she said after a moment, but I get to pick the place. 15 minutes later, they were walking down a quieter street in the Mission District, away from the polished storefronts and towards something more grounded. Clara led them to a tiny locally owned cafe tucked between a vintage bookstore and a mural-covered brick wall. The sign above the door read, Marigold and Maple. Hand-painted, slightly faded, and completely charming. Nathaniel had passed it dozens of times before without ever noticing it. Inside the cafe was warm and cozy, filled with the scent of cinnamon and brewed espresso. Wooden shelves held mismatched mugs, and the walls were decorated with photos of local gardens and families. A young barista behind the counter greeted Clara by name, clearly a regular. She ordered a cappuccino light on the foam. Nathaniel stuck with his usual espresso, though the environment already felt far from usual. They found a small table by the window. Clara wrapped her hands around her mug as she looked out at the street, then turned to him with a half smile. So, Nathaniel, what exactly do you do? He smiled, unsurprised by the directness. I run a tech investment firm, mostly startups, software, AI, and some sustainability ventures. She nodded slowly. Thoughtful sounds. Busy and intense. It is. Long hours, high stakes, a lot of pressure, and a lot of money, I'm guessing. He chuckled. Yes, that too. Clara leaned back, studying him openly. You don't seem like someone who ends up in small coffee shops like this. Nathaniel lifted his cup. I don't, but maybe I've been missing out. For a while they just talked, not small talk, not networking, real conversation. Clara told him about her grandfather's old greenhouse where she first fell in love with plants. She spoke of early mornings, arranging blooms, the satisfaction of building something with her hands, and how the quiet simplicity of her routine brought her peace. Nathaniel listened, more than he spoke, drawn in by how her voice warmed when she described how flowers could heal people, how they marked beginnings and endings, births, funerals, love stories. There was nothing transactional in her life. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She just lived with purpose. He found himself telling her things he didn't usually say out loud. That sometimes, late at night, after the meetings and emails were done, he sat alone in his luxury penthouse and wondered what all of it was really for. That he couldn't remember the last time he had a genuine conversation that didn't involve numbers, projections, or power moves. Clara didn't judge. She just nodded, like she understood more than she let on. At one point, she glanced down at his watch, an exclusive design from a European maker, and said, "You know, for someone who runs the clock, you seem surprisingly unhurried today." Nathaniel smiled, setting his cup down. "That's because today, for once, I don't want to be anywhere else." The words caught them both off guard. Clara looked down, a small smile tugging at her lips, then met his gaze. "Careful," she said softly. "You're starting to sound like someone who might enjoy real life." The spell broke only when Clara glanced at the time and stood. "I should get back. The afternoon crowd at the shop can be surprisingly demanding." Nathaniel rose with her. "Can I walk you back?" She hesitated. "You don't have to. I want to." As they stepped outside, the sun had shifted, casting golden light over the sidewalks. They walked in comfortable silence for most of the way, until Clara stopped in front of a little shop with flower buckets lining the sidewalk. She turned to him, her tone playful. "Well, Mr. Brooks, thanks for the coffee. Maybe next time you can try something a little less corporate, like a lavender latte." He laughed. "You have a deal." As she disappeared into the shop, Nathaniel lingered for a moment, staring at the flowers in the window. They weren't expensive or rare, but they were beautiful in a way that felt honest. And for reasons he couldn't fully explain yet, he knew this encounter had just scratched the surface of something far deeper than a car door. Something was shifting. He wasn't sure where it would lead, but for the first time in a long while, he was eager to find out. Nathaniel Brooks didn't make a habit of altering his routine. His calendar was usually filled to the brim with back-to-back meetings, strategy sessions, and meticulously curated social events. But that week, something subtle yet undeniable had shifted. He found himself rerouting his morning walks and early afternoon breaks, always ending up within a few blocks of the flower shop where Clara Jensen worked. At first, he told himself it was simply curiosity. Maybe it was the way she'd held her ground in conversation, or the calm presence she exuded in contrast to the high-stakes world he came from. Whatever it was, Nathaniel kept coming back. The second time he visited the shop, he bought a modest bouquet of sunflowers. Clara's suggestion for his office, claiming they might brighten up the place. She smiled, didn't press, and wrapped them with brown craft paper and twine. The third time he came by, under the guise of needing a last-minute gift for a friend's engagement. He stayed longer that day, chatting as Clara arranged white peonies and eucalyptus leaves. "I think you just like seeing me with my hands full," she teased lightly. He smiled. That and I never realized flowers could be so deliberate. Every stem, every color, There's a reason behind it. That's the idea. She said, eyes focused on her work. Nature doesn't just throw things together. There's a rhythm, a harmony. You just have to learn how to listen to it. Nathaniel began to notice the details, how her fingers moved with practiced ease, how her eyes lit up when someone complimented her window displays, how she spoke to every customer with the same warmth no matter who they were. She knew the names of the regulars, their favorite flowers, even their anniversaries. Her shop was more than a business. It was a living, breathing part of the community. In those brief moments between customers or during lunch breaks when they'd sit on overturned crates behind the store, he learned more about Clara's world. She shared stories of her father who'd passed the shop down to her before retiring. She talked about childhood summers spent helping in the greenhouse, how she saved up to study botanical design, and how, after a failed corporate internship, she returned to what made her feel whole. Nathaniel, on the other hand, found himself saying less and listening more. It was a new rhythm for him, one he hadn't experienced in years. The conversations were unfiltered, unguarded. There were no ulterior motives, no networking, no brand alignment to consider, just human connection. One afternoon, while they rearranged a delivery of tulips, Nathaniel admitted something that had been sitting with him. I've been in this city for 15 years, and I think I know more about your world in 3 visits than I do about my own neighborhood. Clara smiled, but didn't look surprised. That's the thing about being busy all the time. You forget to actually live where you are. He looked at her, genuinely struck. Do you ever wonder if you made the right choice? Not going for something bigger. Her response was immediate. What I have is big. Nathaniel, it's not loud or shiny, but it matters. People walk in here carrying grief or joy or love, and I get to be a small part of that every day. That's enough. Her words lingered long after he left. That night, instead of heading to the usual exclusive rooftop lounge with his colleagues, Nathaniel stayed home and placed the bouquet she had made in the center of his dining table. For the first time in years, the space felt less sterile, less like a showroom, and more like something lived in. Over the next several weeks, his visits became more frequent. Sometimes, he offered to carry boxes from delivery trucks. Other times, he simply sat on a stool near the register, sipping a locally brewed herbal tea Clara had recommended. He watched her move through her world, and each time he admired the ease with which she blended into it, not because she was trying to be noticed, but because she was fully present. His friends noticed the change. His assistant commented that his schedule was less jam-packed. Even his driver raised an eyebrow. When Nathaniel asked to be dropped off several blocks from the office just to walk the rest of the way through the neighborhood, there was a softness growing in him, one that didn't dull his ambition, but began to redefine what success might actually look like. And though Nathaniel didn't say it out loud, he had begun to suspect something quietly powerful, that the most transformative part of his life wasn't going to be another acquisition, another deal, or another zero added to his bank account. It might just be the woman behind the flower counter who made beauty with her hands and meaning with her heart. The buzz began slowly, as these things often do. First, it was a quiet murmur among colleagues, sideways glances during board meetings, questions laced with amusement over drinks at tech galas. Brooks, I hear you've become a fan of fresh-cut flowers. Someone joked one night at an event overlooking the Bay Bridge, their voice light, but their eyes curious. Nathaniel gave a polite laugh and moved on. But the shift was clear. People had started to notice. He hadn't exactly hidden his growing connection with Clara Jensen. But in a city where power dynamics were tracked as closely as stock portfolios, his regular presence at a modest flower shop in the Mission District didn't go unnoticed. Especially not when the man in question was Nathaniel Brooks, someone whose reputation had been built on sharp instincts, lavish events, and pristine public image. One morning, as he stepped into the shop carrying coffee for two, Clara greeted him with a small smile that quickly faded. "Have you seen this?" she asked, holding out her phone. On the screen was a local culture blog known for its snarky tone and city gossip. The headline read, "Tech Tycoon Trades Stocks for Stems. Nathaniel Brooks and the Florist from the Wrong Side of Town." The article featured a candid photo of them from across the street. Nathaniel laughing, holding a small bouquet. Clara beside him, her apron dusted with pollen. The tone of the piece wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. It framed their connection as odd, mismatched, almost performative. Nathaniel scanned the article. Jaw tight, "I didn't know they were watching." Clara crossed her arms. "It's not about being watched. It's how they write it. Like I'm a novelty, a story. I'll call someone," he said, instinctively. "We can get it taken down. Issue a statement." She shook her head. "That's not the point, Nathaniel. You can control your narrative. I can't. I don't have a PR team. I'm just me." For the first time since they met, there was space between them. Not physical, but emotional. Clara's eyes weren't angry. They were disappointed. And somehow, that stung more. That evening, at an exclusive investors' dinner at a private club in Nob Hill, Nathaniel felt the undercurrent of judgment more acutely than ever. As he navigated through crystal flutes and polished conversations, he heard his name followed by whispers, comments cloaked in humor. Then came the moment he knew was inevitable. Lucas Darnell, an old friend from business school, and now a major shareholder in one of Nathaniel's ventures, approached with a half smirk. "You've been keeping a low profile, Nate." Except, of course, in the tabloids, the Florist, huh? Nathaniel didn't respond immediately. Lucas continued swirling his drink. "I mean, she's pretty, and I get the appeal. Something real, something outside the bubble. But let's be honest, this doesn't last. People like her don't understand our world." Nathaniel turned eyes steady. "What world is that exactly?" "One where we pretend authenticity is a liability." Lucas shrugged. "I'm just saying, be careful. Your name carries weight. This kind of distraction, it gets messy, especially when people start questioning your judgment." It was subtle, but the message was clear. Nathaniel's world, the high net worth investors, the elite, the ones who praised him in press releases, had expectations, and stepping outside of them came with consequences. When he returned to the shop 2 days later, Clara was quieter, polite kind, but not open the way she had been. There was a hesitance in her smile, a pause before she responded. The easy flow between them had shifted, like a current interrupted. He stayed until closing that night, helping her water the last of the potted plants. As she locked up, he turned to her under the glow of the street lamp. "I never wanted you to be dragged into this," he said quietly. Clara looked at him, the weight of the past week in her expression. "But I was, and I'm not sure. I know how to handle it. My life was simple." "Nathaniel, now it feels like I'm being watched, judged, turned into something I'm not. He reached for her hand, but she gently stepped back. This isn't about you being kind. I know you mean well. But the world you live in it has rules, and I don't fit into them. Nathaniel's voice was firm. Then maybe the rules need to change. She met his gaze, sadness flickering through her resolve. That's easy to say, harder to live with. As she walked away, her figure growing smaller under the city lights, Nathaniel was left standing, alone in front of the place where so much had begun. The florist shop, once a symbol of something new and bright, now felt like a fragile bridge, one that might not hold under the weight of two very different worlds colliding. In the days that followed, Nathaniel felt the space between him and Clara widen, not through anger or confrontation, but through something quieter, absence. She didn't shut him out completely, but the warmth in her eyes had cooled. Their conversations, once effortless and full of playful ease, were now carefully measured, as though she was guarding a part of herself she had once allowed him to see. He texted, called dropped by the flower shop at different times. Sometimes she was busy. Other times she was polite but distant. And every time he left, he carried with him a lingering heaviness, the unspoken truth that something between them had shifted. Nathaniel had always believed that problems could be solved with action, that effort, logic, and persistence could untangle any complication. That belief had served him well in business, where contracts, mergers, and deals could be negotiated. But love, he was learning, was a different equation. It wasn't about winning. It was about showing up honestly and hoping it would be enough. One evening, unable to sit still, he found himself walking the familiar route toward Clara's shop. The city was quieter than usual, washed in the cool blue of twilight. A light rain had left the sidewalks slick and reflective, mirroring the amber glow of street lamps and storefronts. He waited outside, hands in his pockets, heart heavier than he cared to admit. When Clara finally stepped out, she looked surprised to see him. She wore her usual worn coat, her hair tied back loosely, a tiredness in her expression that he hadn't seen before. "Nathaniel," she said softly, pulling her scarf tighter. "It's late," "I know," he replied, "but I was hoping you'd walk with me just for a little while." She hesitated, then nodded. They walked in silence at first, their steps sinking naturally as if muscle memory had taken over, even as their hearts remained uncertain. Finally, Clara broke the quiet. "I've been thinking a lot lately," she said, "about us, about what it means to be with someone like you." Nathaniel's jaw tightened slightly. "Someone like me. You live in a world that doesn't make space for people like me," she said. "And I'm not saying that to be dramatic. I don't want to become someone. I'm not just to keep up." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "Clara, you don't have to change. That's never what I wanted, but you're used to people adapting," she said, her voice not accusing, but honest. "In your world, people mold themselves to fit opportunities, expectations. I've worked hard to build a life that feels true. I love my work, my community. I'm proud of who I am. But being with you, it makes everything feel so complicated. People look at me like I'm temporary, like I don't belong." Nathaniel looked at her, truly looked, and felt the weight of her words settle into his chest. He had seen the whispers, the dismissive smiles, the quiet judgments. He had ignored them, believing that their bond could rise above it all. But Clara had felt every one of them carried them quietly. And now that weight had begun to push her away. "I don't have the answers," he said, at last his voice low. But I do know that I haven't felt this way about anyone in years, maybe ever. And I don't want to lose that, because I didn't try hard enough to understand what you need. Clara's eyes softened, but the caution remained. This isn't just about trying. It's about whether our lives can really intersect without one of us losing something essential. He reached out gently, taking her hand. Then let me prove that it's possible, that I'm not here to change you, or rescue you, or fix anything. I just want to learn how to stand beside you. That's all. She didn't respond right away. Her gaze drifted toward the city skyline in the distance, where the glowing towers loomed like silent witnesses to everything that had passed between them. Finally, she turned back to him, her fingers tightening slightly in his. "If we do this," she said slowly, "you have to understand, I won't pretend to be someone I'm not. I won't blend into your world to make things easier. I don't want you to." "Nathaniel," said his voice steady, "I want to learn how to live more like you do, to live with intention, with heart." For the first time in days, Clara smiled, faint, hesitant, but real. The road ahead still looked uncertain, filled with questions neither of them could answer just yet. But standing there, in the quiet city, night hand in hand, they both felt something stronger than fear. A reason to try. The invitation came unexpectedly. Nathaniel had mentioned Clara to his mother a few weeks earlier, in what he thought was a passing comment during one of their obligatory weekly calls. He hadn't anticipated Margot Brooks to follow up so directly. "Bring her to dinner," Margot had said. Not a question, not a request, an instruction. Margot was a woman known for her commanding presence in every room she entered, whether it was a philanthropic gala or a quiet gathering at her Pacific Heights estate. A former art curator turned social force. She was graceful, sharp, and unapologetically discerning. Nathaniel had watched her dismantle people with a single glance and rebuild them with a carefully chosen compliment. Clara hesitated when he asked her to come. She didn't say no, but he could see the apprehension in her eyes. Still she agreed. That Sunday evening, they arrived at the Brooks residence. Clara wore a simple navy dress with a thin gold necklace, her hair pulled back loosely. She looked beautiful in a way that was entirely her own. Nathaniel squeezed her hand gently before ringing the bell. The door opened to reveal Margot, tall and poised in a cream-colored silk blouse, her silver hair swept into a flawless chignon. Her eyes flicked briefly to Clara before settling on Nathaniel. "So, this is the florist," Margot said, with a tone that straddled charm and critique. Clara smiled politely. "Yes, ma'am, it's a pleasure to meet you." Margot stepped aside to let them in. "I'm sure it is." Dinner was served in the formal dining room. A long mahogany table set with fine china and crystal. The walls were lined with abstract art and framed accolades from various foundations Margot had supported. The conversation began with small talk, current events, a recent art installation, the state of tech markets. Clara remained composed, engaging when appropriate, listening more than speaking. But Nathaniel could feel the tension simmering beneath the surface, like a storm waiting for the right crack in the sky. Midway through the second course, Margot finally leaned in. "Clara," she said, her tone measured, "I imagine life in the Mission District is quite different from this, isn't it?" Clara looked at her calmly. "It is, but different doesn't mean lesser." Nathaniel's fork paused mid-air. Margot's lips curved into a faint smile, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course," she said. "It's just that Nathaniel moves in certain circles. Circles where legacy and connections matter, where one must understand the nuances of presentation." Clara met her gaze without flinching. "And I'm not here to be a presentation. I'm here because I care about your son." The room went quiet. Margot set down her wine glass with a soft click. Nathaniel looked at Clara, proud but tense. She wasn't backing down, but she wasn't being disrespectful either. She was simply being honest. And it was the kind of honesty his world wasn't used to. "I love her," Mom Nathaniel said suddenly, his voice clear and unwavering. "And I don't care what anyone thinks." Margot looked at her son for a long moment. Then, with an unreadable expression, she offered a soft, almost imperceptible nod. She didn't give her blessing, not in words, but she didn't challenge him either. After dinner, Nathaniel and Clara walked out into the crisp night air. The city lights shimmered below them, and the fog rolled in over the bay like a slow-moving tide. Clara exhaled her breath, visible in the chill. "Well, that went better than I expected." He turned to her, a small smile playing on his lips. "You were perfect." "No," she said with a slight laugh. "I was honest. That's the only thing I know how to be." He wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "It's what I love most about you." Over the next few weeks, something shifted. Nathaniel began turning down invitations, black tie galas, high-level mixers, charity auctions that once felt like obligations carved in stone. Instead, he spent evenings helping Clara sort deliveries, clean vases, and prepare morning orders. He'd arrive before sunrise, sleeves, rolled up apron, tied clumsily over his pressed shirts, and laugh at himself when he overwatered the ferns or miscounted tulips. Customers were surprised at first, some even whispered, but over time they accepted it. The man who once negotiated million-dollar deals was now wrapping daisies with twine completely at ease in a space that didn't care about who he was, only how he showed up. One afternoon, as they sat outside the shop, with 2 cups of tea and a crate of unsold marigolds at their feet, Nathaniel looked over at Clara. What if he said slowly, "We opened something together, a second shop, or a space that brings together your world and mine, something that feels like us?" Clara tilted her head, amused. "You running a flower shop? I'd need a lot of training," he said, grinning. "But I'd rather learn something new with you than stay an expert in a world that no longer excites me." She reached for his hand. "Let's see where this goes, as long as we stay true to who we are." And in that moment, the city buzzed around them. But Nathaniel Brooks no longer felt like he was racing to keep up. He was right where he wanted to be. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It was quiet, gradual, woven into the rhythms of everyday life. Nathaniel Brooks, once the face of high-stakes tech, investment, and meticulously structured days, now measured time not in board meetings or quarterly reports, but in flower deliveries, morning light through the shop window, and the slow grounding peace of shared silence with Clara Jensen. Their decision to open a second space together came on the heels of one particularly peaceful morning. The original shop had just reopened after a short renovation. They were sitting out front, sipping coffee as regulars passed by, waving, some stopping to chat. Clara wore her usual smock, streaked with pollen, and Nathaniel had a light dusting of soil on his cuff, where he'd repotted a stubborn fern. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. He turned to her, leaning back in his chair. "You know what I've realized." She smiled, You have a new insight almost every morning. He chuckled. This one's different. I think I've been chasing the idea of legacy for years. Titles, awards, articles. But none of that felt like something I'd leave behind with pride. This what we're building together feels different. Lasting honest. They opened the second space 3 months later. Not a copy of the first, but something new. A hybrid cafe and flower gallery on the edge of Golden Gate Park. Clara's designs lined the walls and counters, bouquets that changed with the season, each carrying a quiet story. Nathaniel brought in wellness elements, locally sourced teas, botanical workshops, digital scheduling tools to help expand community access. They called it Wild and Rooted, a name that reflected both of them. At first, people came out of curiosity. Social media buzzed, headlines read, "Former tech tycoon opens garden cafe with Florist partner." But within weeks, the narrative shifted. People stopped coming because of who Nathaniel used to be. They came because the place made them feel something. Peaceful, inspired, present. Nathaniel's world changed in other ways too. He spent less time in his old office, eventually handing off day-to-day operations to his executive team. He still advised, still made strategic decisions, but from a place of clarity, not compulsion. He no longer needed to prove himself in rooms that never saw the full version of who he was becoming. One afternoon, as the sunlight filtered through hanging vines in their new shop, he stood behind the counter, arranging a bouquet. His hands were clumsy, but improving. Clara watched from across the room. Arms folded, a soft smile on her face. "You've come a long way," she said. He looked up. "Think I'm ready for your job?" "Maybe the junior level," she teased. "Fair enough." He walked over, hands still holding a slightly crooked arrangement of ranunculus and sage. "Do you ever miss the quiet of before?" Clara took the bouquet, adjusting it with ease. "Sometimes. But this new chapter, it's not noise. It's growth. And you've given me space to grow too." That night, after the shop closed, they sat beneath strings of warm lights in the courtyard. The hum of the city surrounded them. But here it felt far away. Clara rested her head on Nathaniel's shoulder, her hand gently wrapped in his. He glanced over at her, his voice quiet. "If someone had told me a year ago that a scratched car would be the beginning of the most meaningful part of my life, I would have laughed them out of the room." She smiled without looking up. Sometimes it takes the smallest crack to let something new in. They stayed like that for a long while, wrapped in stillness and certainty. There were no cameras, no deadlines, no pressure to be anything more than who they were. Just two people who had found something rare in a world that often confused value with wealth. Nathaniel Brooks had once defined success by the view from a corner office. Now he measured it by mornings filled with wildflowers, the laughter of strangers made into friends, and the quiet strength of a woman who reminded him daily that love doesn't need to be loud to be life-changing. In the end, what they built wasn't just a business. It was a life, a home, a shared truth, rooted in presence and blossoming in the simplest, most powerful way possible together. Nathaniel Brooks began his story at the pinnacle of success. To the outside world, he was a symbol of achievement, a self-made millionaire who had everything: power, prestige, and a perfectly curated life in San Francisco. But what no one saw was the quiet emptiness that trailed him from event to event, from office to penthouse. That kind of success, while impressive, lacked the soul and grounding that a meaningful life truly requires. Clara Jensen, on the other hand, lived on the opposite end of the spectrum, a florist rooted in passion, community, and authenticity. She built her days around joy rather than wealth. Her world was smaller in scope, but deeper in impact. She wasn't driven by ambition, but by love for beauty, simplicity, and human connection. When their paths crossed by chance on a city street, what could have been a brief, forgettable encounter turned into the beginning of something transformative. Throughout their journey, they faced challenges that many couples fear: differences in class, public judgment, family expectations, and inner doubt. Nathaniel struggled with the weight of reputation, while Clara wrestled with the fear of losing herself in someone else's world. But what kept their story alive wasn't grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was the quiet bravery in choosing each other again and again, even when it was inconvenient, misunderstood, or difficult. Together, they redefined what success meant. It wasn't about headlines or social status. It was about shared mornings, filled with peace, about building something real with bare hands and open hearts. Nathaniel didn't just fall in love. He evolved. He traded the noise of power for the quiet strength of purpose. Clara didn't give up who she was. She invited someone in who was willing to meet her where she stood. The deeper lesson in their story is this: true fulfillment comes when we stop performing for the world and start showing up for ourselves and the people we care about. It takes courage to walk away from the familiar and pursue a life that feels authentic instead of impressive. And often the things that matter most don't come with applause. They come with peace. In today's fast-paced, success-driven culture, we're constantly told to aim higher, earn more, be seen. But what if the bravest thing we could do is slow down and ask ourselves, what do I truly value? What kind of life do I want to wake up to every day? Nathaniel and Clara's story reminds us that it's never too late to choose a different path, to choose love over legacy presence, over performance, and purpose over prestige. Their journey is not just about romance. It's about reimagining what a meaningful life can look like when it's built with honesty and heart. Now, we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had a moment where life invited you to choose differently? What do you think it really means to live authentically? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective might just be the insight someone else needs to hear. If this story moved you, inspired you, or even just made you reflect for a moment, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support gives us the motivation to keep creating heartfelt, meaningful content that uplifts and connects us all. Let's keep telling stories that matter together.